And we are a few days away from probably one of the most polarizing and important elections, that I've been a part of and been involved with. And that has had a massive impact on the real estate market. So I want to talk about that because I do think that's obviously the topic of the moment right now. We've had Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Milton, both have hit our market, and we had this election going on for a long time. I'm going to talk a lot about the hurricanes and some responses to that, some things you can do to recover, some things you can do if you are a home buyer or seller in today's market because of the storms. But first, I want to talk about the election because I think it's important for everyone to understand we are a few days out from it, and it has definitely been a negative contributing factor to the real estate market in Tampa Bay. So we saw in September the lowest number of home sales in Tampa Bay since the Great Recession. And we'd already been feeling pressure prior to the storms of a lot of people doing what I call, fence sitting, waiting. The response we were getting from a lot of buyers and sellers is, I'm waiting until after the election. Now, we would try and talk them out of that because the reality is having been through numerous presidential elections in my 20-year career, none of them have ever had some sort of massive, change right after the election. But this one's super polarizing and people are afraid. So they're afraid to act. They're afraid to leave their home. They're afraid to put their home on the market. They're afraid to go buy something. It's just fear. And truthfully, unfortunately, more people are motivated by fear than they are by excitement. So we just came to the realization that no matter how much logic we tried to share with people about why they shouldn't wait and that the election really isn't going to have much of a short-term impact on the real estate market, it didn't matter. People were going to do it anyway. So if you've been out there waiting, sitting on the fence, the end is almost near. Like I said, September and October, the stats for October aren't quite out yet. It'll be another week or so before they're out. But I can tell you that September and October sales figures were dramatically impacted by the hurricanes and dramatically impacted by the election. Prior to the storms, we were hearing it repeatedly from people. So now the election's almost over. So what is that going to mean? Well, certainly the storms have inserted an extra amount of fear for people. Fear of the same thing happening again, fear of the financial consequences, fear of buying in the wrong neighborhood, fear of, not getting the right insurance. This fear that these events have inserted into the marketplace kind of contradict what we've had for such a long period of time here in Tampa Bay, which is excitement, energy, a lot of positivity, a lot of great economic news, a lot of people moving here. And now we have the opposite of that happening. So it's certainly going to keep impacting. But now that the election is almost over, what does that mean for you as a buyer or seller? Well, first and foremost, I think it means that you're not alone. If you're thinking that, I promise you a lot of your friends and family members are also in that same boat and have kind of been sitting on the fence. My expectation is now that the election is over, the storms start to get cleaned up. I believe there are going to be some long-standing impacts of both of those things and some short-term impacts, and I want to talk about that today. The short-term impact of the election on impact on the real estate market is I think it's going to cause some buyers and sellers to jump back into the market. Now that the election's over, that uncertainty is out of the way. Their candidate won or their candidate didn't win. Now they have something they can work with. Now they have a known instead of an unknown, and they can, make their plans and make their choices based on that. So it eliminates a variable that's been causing people to sit on the fence. So I certainly do think post-election, we are going to see more buyers and more sellers transact. More buyers and more sellers raise their hand and get off the fence and say, hey, I'm going to buy or sell. Now, whether that activity and those transactions end up actually happening this year or pushing into next year is kind of irrelevant. It's just the activity is going to start to come back again because people are going to jump off the fence. I believe that post-election, we will see an increase in, buyer demand, as well as an increase in homes coming on the market that wouldn't have come on until the election was over. So overall, that's a really positive thing for our real estate market. More listings, more options, because, we could use a little bit more in some segments of our market. And then, of course, buyers starting to come back to the market post-hurricane and, post-election. As more time passes, the damages of the hurricane start to kind of subside. What do I mean by that? First and foremost, the war zone areas that basically a lot of our neighborhoods look like right now with debris and gutted houses. And, that gets, more of that gets cleaned up. We start to get back to normal, which means people that don't live here can come here and start to look and say, oh, it looks nice again and I can think about buying. So I think buyer demand comes back. And I also think it's going to cause some intermarket transactional, impact that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Here's what I mean by that. There are people who have money, who maybe don't have a mortgage, or who are just wealthy, or in a good enough position to where they can wait for their insurance payout on the home that was flooded, and they're going to go and buy something else. And we're certainly going to see some of the people say, I'm leaving and I'm not going to go buy something else. I'm going to go buy somewhere else. And then those are going to be listings. So I believe that each week passes with normalizing, kind of the environment in our neighborhoods. Like, stuff gets cleaned up, it gets better and better. And each week passes, it gets better and better for transactions because sellers will sell and move. Sellers will sell and stay local, and people will start to transact again because all of the barriers in the way of those transactions start to get lifted. First, hurricane season's almost over. We only have another month of it. Certainly we could have some more storms, but once that's out of the way, I think we have a strong close to this year. Things start to get back to on a positive, and I do still believe that 2025 will be a better real estate year than 2024. It just may show up a little later in the year than I was hoping for. So the other thing that I want to talk to you about with what the storm is going to do and what the elections have caused. First and foremost, this kind of pent-up demand that's being held back by the elections and by the storms. When it starts to hit, I think there's certainly a chance that the value drops that we are likely to see for the next, for September, October, and the next few months, some drops in neighborhoods, some depreciation, and some distressed property activity. As that happens, then early in the year, we start to pick up demand and supply and transactions start to happen again, and there's an energy in the market and interest rates continue to drop. I do think we're going to see a drop in home values, but I think it's going to rebound quicker than some other people are saying because of those kind of convergent forces happening at once. Now, what is this storm going to do for buyers psychologically? There is no question that it's going to cause some buyers to say, oh, I don't want to move there because I don't want to have to deal with that. Or I want to leave there because I don't want to ever have to go through that again. There's no question that it's going to cause that for sure. However, there are also a segment of the population, and I talked to a few friends from Canada this week and a couple friends from New York that had been waiting and saying, I'm not going because I don't want to deal with that, or I'll get there and then it'll happen. And now that it's happened in Tampa Bay, people saying, oh, well, the next generational storm probably isn't due for a while. And now it's actually prompting them to think, well, now that it's out of the way, now I can take my trip there, maybe get a better deal. So there's two trains of thought here. There's the side of people that say they don't want to deal with it again and they want to move, and it validated their fears about moving here. And then there's the pool of people that say, well, those storms got out of the way. It's not likely to happen again. It hadn't happened for so long. They got hit with a couple of bad ones. Now they've recovered, and now's the time for us to move there, make our trip there, get a good deal, and in their opinion, mathematically, not likely to have that happen again for a long time. So now is the time that we should move. So I think there's people on both sides of the fence, probably more people a little bit more afraid of it than the opposite, but there are going to be some people that it's going to prompt them to take action. Last but not least, I think you're going to see a product diversification in Tampa Bay. I think you're going to see a movement away from the water for people that had to deal with it. I think insurance prices are going to go up pretty dramatically. And I think a lot of people that are living in single one-story homes in or near water in flood zones are going to financially be forced out of those areas. And probably if they stay in Tampa Bay, moving to the suburbs, moving to new construction areas out in East Hillsborough and Pasco County and North Pinellas, I think you're going to see a movement away from the coast for those people that were impacted. And then I think you're going to see some people that have wanted to move to the coast maybe find some better deals. I think you're going to also see a lot of redevelopment in these neighborhoods. A lot of homes aren't going to be able to be rebuilt because of the FEMA 50% rule. And you're going to see a lot of two-story new construction being built in these flood areas. And I think that's essentially in the long term in some of those neighborhoods bring the values up, because you're replacing a structure that might be worth a few $100,000 with a structure that's worth, maybe $1 million into some of these, waterfront neighborhoods. So I'm a firm believer that the long-term ramifications of this might actually be good in some neighborhoods. From an affordability perspective, there's no doubt that coastal areas are going to become unaffordable for a lot of people. Insurance is going to rise. There's going to be people that new construction properties get built in place of the old construction properties. It's going to raise the values. But I think if you drive around North Carolina, impacted areas, and I don't mean the ones recently impacted, I mean coastal North Carolina that years ago got hit by bad storms, and then you look at Katrina areas, a lot of those areas that flooded, the only thing you'll see are two-story properties or homes on stilts. And I think that we're going to start to see a lot more of that in Tampa Bay.